Good morning, everyone. It's nice to see such a big gathering and from people around the world. Thank you, Thomas, for showing how Germany progressed into renewables, starting from zero and coming up to such a high level. It inspires us, and we, as you said, we learn from experiences of Germany and California and many others who have gone about this task. And it gives us the confidence to go ahead. So I'll be talking about the Indian context, the legal framework, policy, the regulations in India for this, and some of the issues, some of the renewable-rich states such as Gujarat and Tamil Nadu, some practical load curves of how they tackle this. And one of the most important things which is considered in India is the economics of that. And that's why some of the states are apprehensive of going ahead. So I've also included a slide on economics of the cost of balancing. We've attempted that. So we'll see that as we go ahead. This is the provisions of the Electricity Act 2003, the section 86, which is functions of the State Commission, which says that one of the functions is to promote cogeneration and generation of electricity from renewable energy sources of energy by providing suitable measures for connectivity with the grid and sale of electricity to any person, and also specify for purchase of electricity from such sources a percentage of the total consumption of electricity in the area of the distribution licensee, which is renewable purchase obligation. The tariff policy, which was revised on 28th January 2016, has a number of provisions for promoting renewable generation. The objectives itself, one of them is promote generation of electricity from renewable sources, and also take into consideration the variability of such generation from wind and solar, promote hydroelectric power generation, including pumped storage projects to provide adequate peaking reserves, reliable grid operation, and integration of variable renewable energy sources. There are further provisions in the tariff policy which talks about a renewable generation obligation, that power plants whose PPAs have expired or which have completed useful life should set up renewable generating plants and bundle power be sold from those. And in respect of new generating company, any new generating company proposing to establish a coal lignite-based thermal generating station after a specified date would be required to establish renewable energy generating capacity or procure and supply such capacity as may be prescribed by the government from time to time. Now, this prescription of has still to come out through an order, but the policy is there. Then the provision of renewable purchase obligation of they should fix a minimum percentage, and long-term growth trajectory would be as prescribed by the Ministry of Power. The Ministry of Power has already prescribed a trajectory up till 2018-19. So the objective is that they want all states, the Government of India wants all states to have uniform renewable purchase obligations, which was not so far, or not the case as of now. And also a specific thing about solar energy, that they should reserve a minimum percentage of purchase of solar energy. And the other thing is that states which do not have these resources can purchase renewable energy certificates instead of actually purchasing physical renewable power, which would have, of course, multipliers based on technology and vintage, the REC multipliers, because the costs of various types of renewable energies would be different, and also year-to-year prices could be different. it says that states should endeavor to procure power through competitive bidding. But it says that it should be a bid-based tariff framework, which could be allowing tariff to be increased progressively, because this was formed at a time when renewable prices were relatively higher. They have dropped quite a lot. So when this policy was framed, they're in the range of around 4 rupees or 450, and now of course they've dropped to 250. Solar I'm talking about, whereas wind has dropped from. Wind was only through regulated tariff earlier, different ranges. Each state had its own tariff, ranging from 350 to 550 per unit, whereas now when they did competitive bidding in wind, it came down to 346. And of course, one of the ways to encourage renewable energy at that time was that interstate transmission charges and losses should not be levied on power purchased from renewables, which has happened. And for solar and wind, it's been notified by the government that there will be no interstate transmission charges and losses which are levied. Although most of renewable generation is presently being procured intrastate. There is for solar there is some interstate power, but for wind there isn't any interstate sale of power so far. But maybe that would happen in the future. Now, this is the breakup of the generating capacity that we have in India as of now, as on 31st May 2017. Out of 330,000 megawatts or 330 gigawatts, you have the maximum is coal, and followed by renewables now. Renewables has become more than hydro also. If you see it in this pie chart, you'll be able to make out that coal is 59%. This is of installed capacity. RES next at 17%, hydro 14%, and the others are lesser than that. Gas is 8%, but it's hardly utilized because we have shortage of domestic gas, and imported gas is expensive. The target of renewables, which is set by the Government of India for up till March 2022, is 175,000 megawatts, which is split up into these categories. Solar maximum of 100,000 megawatts, 60,000 megawatts of wind. So you can see that these, which are intermittent type of sources, wind and solar power constitute 160,000 out of 175,000. Then 10,000 from biomass and 5,000 from small hydro. This is the likely installed capacity as per the National Electricity Plan that is being in the process of coming out in the year 2022, which is the next 5 years. Out of 483,000, you see that the coal capacity has reduced to 45%, and RES has gone up to 36%. And the others have not substantial change in that. And if you see 2027, it has the coal capacity is envisaged to reduce further. RES is envisaged to grow even more. The target up to 2022 has been set by the government, but this has not been officially announced. But this is what is informally discussed, and so another 100,000 megawatts between 22 and 27 will make it 275,000 megawatts out of total capacity of 617 gigawatts. The Indian Electricity Grid Code, which was first taken out in 1999, was revised in 2010, and it had provisions for scheduling, forecasting, scheduling, and of renewable energy. So this is when we first started the CERC first started this, where it talked about that there would be must-run stations, but in case it was a question of grid security, they would have to back down. And the data acquisition system was compulsory to be provided so as to get real-time data from these stations. and the system operator can direct a wind farm to curtail its reactive power draw or injection in case of security of grid or safety of equipment. And of course, during startup and the reactive power draw should not affect the grid performance. And of course, forecasting or scheduling was mandated. Similarly, standards for connectivity of renewables has been taken out by the Central Electricity Authority. There's technical standards for connectivity of these resources, two different ones. One is below 33 kV, and a different technical standard for 33 kV and above. So these are already in place. The CERC took out a deviation settlement mechanism taking into account the variability of renewable energy sources in 2015, and which was operationalized from 1st November 2015. It talked about absolute error here, which is with respect to the available capacity, which was different from what was earlier, which was the schedule at the denominator. Now, these are the rates which were prescribed by CERC for under injection, and then you had deviation charges for over injection, the absolute error. And then it took out another amendment where some of the states, there are about 8 renewable rich states in India, mostly in the southern and western region. They were feeling the pinch of this because of financial implications on their system, and therefore they represented and wanted a greater freedom because the maximum limit of deviation which was allowed at each interstate boundary was 150 megawatt, 12% or 150 megawatt, whichever is lesser. So because of this, it was increased for renewable rich states, which had renewable capacity of 1,000 to 3,000 megawatts. It was increased to 200 megawatt, and if it had more than 3,000 megawatts installed capacity, the limit was increased to 250 megawatt. Well, this is just the coal-based station which is controllable, and it can stay constant or it can go up and down. It's controllable. Whereas a wind farm in Tamil Nadu, you'd see that variation would even vary from day to day. So this is on 10th May 2012, and this is on 11th May. So it could vary on day-to-day basis. A solar park also, this would be the normal curve, which is on a non-cloudy day. And this is in Gujarat. And on a cloudy day, this is the sort of generation that can happen. And this is another day in the same park. So just to give you an idea of how generation varies. There are these major considerations these are challenges for grid operation: frequency stability, voltage stability, transmission congestion, and angular stability. And if you deal with all these, then there wouldn't be any problem in managing intermittent generation. In frequency, solutions for frequency stability are quick acting generation like hydro and pump storage, including pump storage, as well as gas generating stations. And fortunately, we have about more than 25,000 megawatts of gas capacity, which is not being utilized, and it's running like a base load station. So there is some discussion about getting these to operate as balancing stations. Then, of course, there are other balancing mechanisms like megawatt scale batteries and compressed air energy storage, thermal storage, flywheel. And of course, some of these have got a double benefit that they can act as a load as well as a generator. And it will be preferable to have these balancing sources close to the source of generation so as to utilize the generation and transmission system more optimally. We already have some pump storage plants which we want to increase. This is in Kadamparai in Tamil Nadu. This is in West Bengal in Purulia. This is the types of storage and what they are suitable for. This has been extracted from EPRI in the US. And of course, the different types of batteries which are there, which the one which is most exciting at present is lithium ion, but I think these things could change. And what we need to, of course, consider for storage is the size of storage, which is megawatt, as well as the duration, so power and energy both, the cycle life when we are working out the economics, the depth of discharge of each cycle, and the charge and discharge rate, and of course the requirements, space and geographical requirements. Demand response is one thing which is immediately available. All you need to do is make the policies, the rules and regulations, and this can work very well and very fast, in a very fast way. So there is thinking there is in the policy also, tariff policy, of facilitating demand response through using smart meters for all types of consumers. We don't have it so far. The rules still have to be laid out by the regulators. It is there in the policy. And you could have a reliable supply tariff and an interruptible supply tariff, which would help in managing variable generation very well. This is the type of ancillary services that are existing internationally. But we have ancillary services which is based on unrequisitioned surplus generation from central generating stations or interstate generating stations, which is limited capacity, and sometimes it could happen that there is zero ancillary services when there is no unrequisitioned surplus. So we need to get this. There is discussion of getting into ancillary services which are competitively bid by all types of sources by just giving the functional requirements, or whether they can respond within seconds or minutes, or a slow response of half an hour. This is internationally what we picked up from various. These are all in fact US types of ancillary services in US energy markets. Voltage stability is going to be another issue. It already dictates our connectivity standards that each wind generator should not burden the grid with reactive power and should be able to control that. There's a certain amount of limits which have been given. And of course, the advanced energy storage systems can provide both these services, the active power control as well as the reactive power control. So it all comes down to economics of what is more efficient, what is more optimum. Transmission congestion can be avoided. You can have flexible FACTS devices which are which can be thyristor controlled series compensation or phase shifting transformers to transfer power from a heavily loaded line, two parallel lines, from a heavily loaded line to a lightly loaded line. There are a number of provisions of phase shifting transformers in our future power systems. We have some TCSCs, but I think it would be good to use more of these. And in case the balancing source is located at a location which is different from the place of renewable generation, then we need to provide adequate transmission capacity for transferring this balancing power across control areas. And in that case, we need to have some market integration done. Angular stability, of course, is also important, because otherwise it would lead to could lead to grid failure, and these are things which are in process studies. Phasor measurement units have been installed quite substantially in the Indian grid in order to help the system operator to see when the angular difference is going beyond certain limit. so as to for him to act accordingly. Green corridors, which was mentioned by Mr. Dem, was on phase 1. Phase 1 includes both interstate transmission system at these levels, and phase 2, which was for 175,000 megawatts, is under finalization. Some portion under operationalization. Now, cost of balancing is, as I said, a major concern. And I don't know if it's a major concern in Germany and in other places, but it's a major concern in India. What constitutes the cost of balancing? We did a detailed analysis consulting the states of Tamil Nadu, Gujarat, these highly renewable rich states. One is, of course, keeping standby capacity for continued supply in case of dip in RES generation. So there's a fixed cost, there's a commitment cost to that. Increase of fixed charge for coal-based or gas-based generation due to operation at lower plant load factor. Because when the generation goes up or down, it has to be balanced by any type of generation, coal-based or gas-based. And because of that, if the plant load factor reduces, the per unit cost of fixed charge of that capacity goes up. In India, of course, we have mostly contracts which have a two-part component, which is a fixed charge for the capacity and the energy charge or fuel charge for the fuel used, which is unlike in some of the countries. Maybe Germany, they have energy-only markets. I'm not sure if they have a commitment charge for capacity, but in most of our capacity is about 90% capacity has got fixed charge component as well as a fuel charge component. Therefore, the fixed charge would go up if you use that generation less when the plant load factor goes down. So there's a cost to that. And operation of these coal-based or gas-based generation at some optimum levels causes an increase of fuel charge because it's operating less efficiently. There's an increase of heat rate, increase of auxiliary consumption. Cost of deviation from schedule under the Deviation Settlement Mechanism. For these, although a provision has been made for renewable rich states for higher deviation allowed without penalty, but it still it goes beyond that 250 megawatt limit. We've done some calculation for that. And of course, backing down of cheaper generation when it's not strictly on merit order dispatch at that time, because these renewable generation are must-run units, and therefore they'll have to. So the old contracts of solar and wind would be in the range of 4 rupees per unit, whereas the variable charge for capacity which is already there with the state distribution company, the fuel charge would only be around 150 to 250, 1 rupee 50 paisa to 250. So which is losing money if you take from wind and solar and back down your generation in coal and gas. So there is a cost of that. This is the Gujarat load curve, how they manage it. This was a particular day. I think the day got missed out, but this is for a particular day in this year when you have, so the top one is solar, the topmost one, and then you have wind. And gas, you can see is almost constant. So it's running like a base load station, not like a peaking or a balancing station, which is what we need to do in India if you want to do. And you will see the fluctuation in the bottommost one is the central sector generation, which is basically coal-based plants, which is being varied, and the coal lignite of Gujarat itself doesn't vary as much as the central generating stations. And there's a very small hydro generation which you can hardly see. Now, cost of balancing, when we consider all these, there are assumptions for this. If you spread this total impact over the renewable generation alone, it comes to 1 rupee 41 paisa. The major portion of this is 50 paisa, which is point number 3, where you necessarily take 4 rupees generation and back down 2 rupees generation. That's a major impact. But in future, now this is for existing stations, because existing stations have fixed charge are already sunk, that those are sunk costs, and therefore those have to be paid for. But when you plan in the future, then you have to plan whether you'd like to build new coal-based stations or renewables, or take power from renewable stations. If you do that, then the fixed charge plus a variable charge for future comes to around 350. If the efficient, the ones which are through competitive bidding would come to around 3 rupees 50 paisa, whereas a renewable solar PV has come down to 244, which comes out lesser than that. So in future, what may happen is this may become 50 paisa. In fact, it may work the other way. It may be beneficial for people to take electricity, but there is, of course, other considerations about or higher balancing charge for fuel and for the ones which are operated more inefficiently, the coal-based stations. But by and large, this 50 paisa will become 0, and therefore, if you do that, it comes down below 1 rupee per unit. I have also put the extra transmission charge because the transmission lines are not loaded to optimum levels when you have fluctuating generation. But in future, there are a lot of things which could change, because if you have balancing capacity at the source of renewable generation, then your transmission system will be used much more optimally. And therefore, in fact, it's whether to strengthen the transmission system or to put balancing generation at the source of renewable. Cost-benefit analysis should be done and seen which works out cheaper. So this is the sort of course, if this is spread out over the entire energy met, it comes down to 51 paisa. But even if you consider it spread over renewables, 141 will come down to less than 1 rupee. And in future, if with battery prices falling or balancing generation falling, and if you use gas more optimally, this is expected to fall. This is the Tamil Nadu load curve for 10th August 2017. And these are two of the most highly renewable rich states. So if you see, it's Tamil Nadu's thermal right at the bottom is almost constant. After that is central generating stations, the scheduling from, again, coal-based stations mainly. That is fluctuating to some extent. And then above that you have hydro, which is more during the peak time, and that's made to fluctuate. And gas, which is a small quantum, which is constant. Then the IPPs, which is almost constant, and CPPs, which is captive power plants, and cogeneration biomass, which is constant. And the one wind, before that, of course, it is purchased from long-term excess. That's almost constant. Wind is fluctuating because that's not controllable, and that's how the wind pattern is. And solar on top. This is how they've met the demand on this particular day. In Tamil Nadu also, we worked out the balancing charge. It comes to more or less the same as that for Gujarat. So that's the sort of implication. But if you include a balancing charge of, say, about 80 or 90 paisa over 240, it still would be comparable to coal. So it would probably make it's more or less in future has reached grid parity if you consider including the balancing costs. This is just a graph to show you that there's a forecast and forecast, and then there's an intraday where you can revise the forecast. The one on top is the day-ahead forecast, the red line, and below that is intraday forecast, which is allowed to be changed 18 times in a day, where Tamil Nadu has not used that facility for revising it 18 times. It has revised it for a lesser number of times. And the bottom is the actual generation. Now, this is a graph we prepared for 2022, considering the sources, how we are going to meet the peak. So if you see the topmost blue thing, those are actually reserves. The demand curve is that's demand curve, and the one blue above that is reserves, which we've kept, to show that we have reserves enough, so that in case there is, as a requirement of reserves, whenever there's a shortage, due to unforeseen circumstances, outages, you have sufficient reserves. So if you see, we have considered the bottom coal. We saw this. The coal is fluctuating, but what we've done is we've minimized when the solar is high during the middle of the day. We've minimized the other generation, which is, of course, wind by itself is complementary to solar because it peaks somewhere around after midday. So it peaks between about 16 hours or 17 hours, or in this case, it's peaking later in the evening. So it's trying to self-balance the solar to some extent, and gas, which is green. Also, we've fluctuated the gas so as now. If you see the coal here, it worked out to a plant load factor of around 90%, which is really not causing any problems to a coal-based station. So we can, through intelligent handling of various sources, manage this pretty well in the future also. There are certain issues which are under consideration in the states. Some of the state, the CERC has notified the forecasting and scheduling mechanism for interstate, and they've also put in place model regulations for intrastate scheduling, forecasting, and deviation settlement. But very few states have come out with this. Many of them are in the draft stage. They still have to finalize it. So what we would feel is that in case the states have not come out with this, by default they should follow the interstate mechanism, and up till the time they take out their own mechanism. And ancillary services market development of that is a must, giving functional requirements of the response times, and which should be done through competitive bidding, so that even thermal generators which are flexible could compete in the ones which require little slower response, because we've got a lot of thermal capacity, coal-based capacity, which is lying idle. And one of the most important things is that when we calculated this, the balancing charge was calculated for that state. Our feeling is that, which is also given largely in the policy, is that the balancing charge should be shared by all the states in the ratio of their renewable purchase obligations, because it's not just buying something. There's a financial impact. It's not the cost of energy alone. It's also the balancing cost. And I guess the same thing is being done in Germany, where you have balancing costs being shared by all 4 distribution companies, at least the responsibility. So that's one thing which would encourage more of renewable generation, rather than putting it on the state which has that source of generation. And optimum use of resources for balancing. So as I said, doing a cost-benefit analysis of seeing whether to put the balancing source near renewable generation or strengthen the transmission system by balancing at a distance, whichever works out cheaper. The cost-benefit analysis, whatever it indicates, should be done. Thank you.